My name's Jeff Musson. I'm the founder of North of 41 and also the president of Dynamite Network. And this event that we're hosting here at the TSX is a great collaboration that we formed, I guess it was about a year ago. It's a quarterly series where we really tap into the insights of some key industry stakeholders to give us their thoughts. You know, their behind the scenes story. How did they rise to the top? What are some of the issues that they faced? And it's been a great series. So I want to thank everyone, like I said, for coming out today. And I want to turn the mic over to Michael to say a few words on behalf of the TSX.
Thanks. Great, thanks very much, Jeff, and good morning, everyone. For those of you who I have not met, my name is Michael Crusay. I'm one of the heads of business development at Toronto Stock Exchange and TSX Venture Exchange. For those of you who don't know where we are at the home of Canada's capital markets. This is, of course, the Toronto Stock Exchange. Just behind me, or behind the wall behind me, is the place where companies go public, where they ring the bell as part of their market open ceremonies. About 12 months ago, almost this week, Shopify rang the bell there as part of what was, at that time, one of the most successful Canadian IPOs ever. Since then, there's been a huge amount of activity in the tech sector. Certainly that one transaction got a lot of attention, but in the last 12 months, we've seen over 30 tech companies going public. And so 30 companies ringing the bell behind me over the last 12 months, making it our most active sector by a long shot in Canada. And so it's obviously been a really good time for the tech community and for everything that's going on, not just for public companies, but also for the amount of private funding that's been going on in the sector. Today's session is our attempt, in partnership with Jeff, to continue some of that really exciting momentum. You'll see banners around here referencing TSX Ignite. TSX Ignite is an initiative we began a few years ago in partnership with the startup community, in partnership with the leading incubators and accelerators across the country, and in partnership with the advisory community across the country to help build and fund great Canadian companies. And part of that is bringing great mentors and leaders to tell their stories, to help companies learn from the mistakes, successes, challenges, and so on of those companies. And so today we've got two of those great speakers with us to tell their story. As is a bit of our custom at these events, we want to also do a couple of very quick announcements around sort of important community developments or community initiatives. I've only got two announcements in that respect this morning. First of all, Lazaridis Institute. Anyone know what that is at Laurier University? Quick show of hands. All right, there's about 8 hands up, which is great news. For those of you who don't know, Laurier University, of course, in Waterloo, Lazaridis Institute, part of the university, announced a partnership a few months ago with us and also with Deloitte around a new initiative to build and support tech companies. That was announced a few months ago, but stay tuned. In the coming weeks and months, there'll be much more developments and announcements coming from them around the specifics of the program and how it may apply to some in the audience. So stay tuned and look out for that. And a couple of the key reps from Lazaridis are in the front row here if you want to chat to them about that. Second announcement, and indeed the final one, is around social media. Please use it. Please use it today, and please continue to follow us. Our Twitter handle is @TSX_TSXV. It's on the screen there. We're using the hashtag TSXIgnite. Jeff, do you have one as well you're using? Yeah. At North of 41 as well. So please use those, please follow us, please join the conversation through the day today. That's it in terms of announcements. I now want to hand it to the three esteemed people on the stage with us today. Garrett from Bloomberg, who's going to be moderating the session, Janet and Jeff, who've got fascinating stories to tell, and we'll leave it for about 30 to 35 minutes, and then there'll be Q&A from the audience. All right, go ahead, guys.
Right, I was going to take the mic, but I've got one on me. Good thing I didn't start talking. Yeah, well, welcome, guys. Why don't you just quickly, we're talking about scaling up Canadian companies. Why don't you just quickly talk about sort of, like really quickly, and I want to jump into something else, but just introduce yourself and the companies that you've worked at and the roles that you've had at those places.
Good.
Jeff, go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay, so my name is Janet Bannister. I'm a general partner at Real Ventures. Real is the largest, most active early stage investor in Canada. I think in terms of scaling up, I joined eBay in 2000 in Silicon Valley and was lucky enough to be there at eBay during a period of extremely rapid growth. So that was, just a fascinating experience. When I joined eBay, it was primarily a collectibles site, and I was responsible for the non-collectibles categories. And basically, tripled or quadrupled that business year over year for several years. Then I moved to Canada with eBay and started a website called Kijiji and scaled that business as well, and grew that to be one of the most visited sites in Canada. I then led the global Kijiji business and worked at a startup, sort of from the grassroots on, before I joined Real Ventures.
Okay, Jeff.
Cool. Jeff Cates, president of Intuit Canada. You may know Intuit more for brand names like QuickBooks or TurboTax or Mint. My story is when I started young, I was a classic entrepreneur, one thing after the other, most of them all small, scrappy things that failed in the first year. And then in university, I started up a business with a couple of guys and thought I was going to go on that path, and then an internship opened up with HP in their medical division, and I thought, wow, that sounds like less craft dinner and a good chance to learn from other companies. And it was HP, fathers of Silicon Valley. And so I took that path, and although the calling to come back to small businesses has been throughout my career, I've stuck on it. So I spent 15 years at HP in a variety of different roles, sales, marketing. In the end, I ran the consumer division. And then I moved over to Apple for just shy of 3 years, and I ran the marketing and sales for small business through to enterprise. And then Intuit came a calling and said, hey, come take us global, help make products for Canadians by Canadians in Canada, and innovate. And it was about 4.5 years ago.
Okay, and so yeah, I want to ask you later on about a few, stories and kind of war stories from your time doing those things. But just looking at our title, I mean, it's something that we see this word scaling in Canada and small businesses and world-beating businesses come up a lot when you go to events like this, when you talk in the startup community. And we kind of run through this list of things that we have problems with in Canada. Maybe we're not risk averse enough. Maybe there's not enough early stage funding. Maybe we have trouble bringing in people to run our businesses as they grow because of visa issues. We don't have the talent. But once in a while, you see a company like Shopify, which was just mentioned, just sort of like completely ignore all these issues and just succeed wildly. And so I'm wondering if we can kind of take a step back. I mean, does Canada really actually have these structural issues that we need to sort of rage against to try to actually build our companies here? Okay.
So I don't think we have structural issues. I think that the biggest challenge is the talent to scale companies. There's certainly no shortage of entrepreneurs and ideas. But what is challenging is sort of how do you get beyond that 5 or 10 person company to make it extremely successful. And I think one of the challenges, and especially based on comparing it to my time in the Valley, is we don't have enough people who know how to scale those companies. If, for instance, I would just compare, in the Valley, if you want to find somebody who can really scale your sales and marketing or do online marketing, well, there's literally hundreds of people, right, who have grown up at, eBay or Yahoo or Google or Facebook or Uber or wherever, and you hire one of those and bring them over. And I think that that's the biggest challenge for us. A small story on that, I was speaking last time I was in San Francisco. I was with a friend of mine from eBay who started a company called Clover, which was acquired by First Data, but it was a hardware company to take mobile payments, or to take payments, so almost like a Square. And he told this story. He said, we were originally going to be a software company, and then we decided we wanted to pivot, and we wanted to be a hardware company. We needed to be a hardware company, but he said, I knew nothing about hardware, and I didn't know anything about design, but I called up a friend of mine who was very good friends with the original guys who designed the Tesla. And so they came and worked with me for 3 months, these guys who originally designed and helped get the hardware for, the initial manufacturing for Tesla. And I thought, okay, that is the Valley, right? That is sort of network of talent. And I think that is what's lacking here in Canada. However, the good news is I think that's starting to change because it really is a flywheel effect. And the more great companies you have, whether it's Shopify or somebody else, that grows up, they produce a whole next generation of great entrepreneurs. And just today, there was an announcement, League, which is one of our portfolio companies run by Michael Serbinas. They just raised one of the largest Series A rounds ever. Amazing team, great profile, a great team. And again, they are training, the next generation of builders.
Right. Jeff, what do you think is sort of the biggest challenge then to building a company here?
I think you're bang on. The talent that you can tap into is bigger in the US for sure, and that helps companies scale. I think the other thing is Canadians often have this mindset of like, hey, if we can land it here, then we can go elsewhere. I was with 2 tech companies in Montreal last week, and both of them had that same story of like, well, if I could just land Quebec, then I could move on, or if I could just get in Canada, and then I could move on. And the amount of time, for example, in this one case, it was a product. The amount of time that it takes to get into Walmart Canada is probably about the same amount of time it takes to get to Walmart US. So if you've got the same product in the US versus an entrepreneur here, man, they're going to be 10x the size by the time the Canadian guy gets to that level. So part of it's just the mindset of how we think that we want to get our roots here before we can expand. And I think the US, either if they have that, they have a bigger market to do it in, or they just have people mentoring them that cause them to think bigger.
Right. Yeah, no, I understand that there's a very specific skill set that comes with, we have like a 10-person e-commerce company, now we need a 100-person e-commerce company. But I mean, like, just if you look around these buildings and in this room, I mean, we have this we have real business talent in Canada, and that has worked internationally, that has worked in a variety of sectors, maybe not at a startup yet. What would you say to, or like, what do you think is the value of someone who maybe worked at larger companies their entire life in a variety of roles, and they're like, well, you know what, I actually want to try this startup thing. I mean, do you think that's something that can help Canadian startups, or what would you like? I mean, I guess you're in a similar position. Like Jeff, like you've had this entrepreneurial background, but you have worked at larger companies most of your life. I mean, if you were to say, okay, I'm going to go do my own thing now, I mean, do you think you'd be prepared to do it?
I'd certainly like to. I'm not there right now, but yeah, as I was listening to these guys, I'm like, man, I could connect you with so and so and so and so and so and so. And so I think there's a role for those that are in corporate or those that have experience running organizations to help these small businesses. And certainly I think in general, Canadian leaders have a pride in helping build Canadian companies. I certainly do. So there's a role there for them to play a mentor. And I think that's, I get to both of our points, I think that's one of the biggest things we can do to help these small businesses is connect them with people that do have international experience or do have experience getting into bigger markets so that we can help push them to think bigger or help connect them and make it easier.
Yeah. I would say I think that people who have worked for a large company can be successful in a startup company, but I think what it requires more than any skill is a mindset, and a willingness to think differently, to move more quickly. And the advantage of having worked in a large company and going to a small company is, first of all, you understand how a large company works. And I find a lot of entrepreneurs who have only been entrepreneurs, when they go and try to do business with a large company or they try to sell to a large company and they don't understand, they just can't fathom why the decision process takes so long, right? And so things like that, having worked at a large company, you build a definite skill set. And I think that the biggest thing that you need, as I said, it's to move to a small company is a mindset, willing to think differently, to learn, to often wear multiple hats simultaneously.
Right. What are other things that corporate Canada should do to support smaller tech startups? Jeff?
One is to buy Canadian. You see some large organizations that do that. Intuit does that in the US. They'll put a bias towards buying from small businesses less than $10,000. So I think those are great types of initiatives. Two is actively get involved in mentor networks. Like, for example, Futurepreneur has a great mentor network that I think is great for people to get involved with. If you've got, We Care, Give Back, or give back to the community initiatives, rather than just giving time, helping at the food bank, which is great. Why not give time with your marketing team helping a small business overhaul their marketing? Take the knowledge experts you have and actually help them apply it to a small business to make them better.
Because I guess like for a period we had sort of corporates saying, oh, like we'll just slap our logo on an incubator somewhere and we've done our part. But then the startups are saying, no, like you need to buy our products. Like you need to give us revenue and then M&A and that kind of thing. I mean, do you think that there's still a block between, say, large Canadian companies, the banks, the telcos, where they're at and how they look at innovation or smaller companies, and then where your portfolio companies are, Janet?
So, I mean, I don't know. I guess I don't view it as it's the large companies' role to give a handout to the small companies. I think that fundamentally there are two different types of startup companies. I think, as I said, I think the biggest challenge for the startup communities is how do you get that talent? And I think the things that we can do and that's most needed are, okay, how do we train that next generation of managers? And I'm looking at Steve and Elaine, who are heading this big initiative from the Lazaridis Foundation that is spending a lot of time. I mean, I think that type of thing is the real needle mover in getting the next generation of leadership talent.
Okay, so then there's like that talent and training issue. I mean, Jeff, if you could change one thing, about the ecosystem, whether it's a regulatory thing or a way, a place where funding is that it shouldn't be, or something like that, what to kind of help smaller companies, not help, maybe not be the best word, but put our ecosystem in a position where we can compete better with sort of these massive global ecosystems, particularly the Valley. What would be that thing that you would change about how things are done in Canada?
I don't know if it's a change per se. There's lots of things that government could do and public could do and private could do, but I think as I look out where Canada will play over the next 10 to 20 years, you've got a wealth of resources with things like 3D printing and robotics. I could see more of that industry will move closer to the resources, which bodes well for our country. But that means a lot of STEM type jobs, and that will be our future. And so it's really, really important that we're thinking about that now and creating those resources to help funnel or fuel that growth, which means impacting immigration policy and emigration policy and the people that we're teaching in school. Right. And so more focus around where are the areas that Canada can be successful, and government and public kind of working towards building the talent pipeline for that, I think is going to be really important.
Janet, do you have sort of like kind of an example from one of your companies of, or maybe when you started Kijiji in Canada, of like going from something very small to something very big, and like if there was like an issue or a challenge or like some kind of anecdote from an experience like that? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think that one of the things about being an entrepreneur and scaling a company is that your role evolves so quickly over time. And I actually had lunch with Alan Lau from Wattpad last week. And for those of you who don't know, Wattpad is based in Toronto, extremely successful startup company. And they have, basically what it is, it's a website, they target teenage girls, and people can go on and write books, huge engagement. I think I saw 45 million users. Anyways, what he was talking about, what I thought was very interesting, was the evolving role of the founder, right? And at the beginning, you need to work on, you need to be very good at finding product market fit, evolving, right? Then you need to be very good at selling your vision and pitching to investors. And then as things go on, you need to figure out, somewhere in there, you need to be very good at sales, right? And how do you sell? And then you need to be very good at hiring and motivating a team, right? And then you need, and so the role changes. So I think the most challenging part of being an entrepreneur in a scaling company and being the CEO of a scaling company is that evolving role. One example, as I said, in terms of our portfolio, we have a company called Breather, which is fairly new to Toronto, so you may not have heard of it, but basically it's like an Airbnb for private spaces, whether it be for meeting or for renting classes, things like that. You can rent furnished spaces, meeting areas by the hour. It was started in June 2013 by a guy. We wrote the original check into it. It's now gone on and raised about $27 million, extremely successful. They have places in 10 different cities. They're New York, San Francisco, LA. Their vision in New York, for instance, is to have a breather space in every single building. But I look at that entrepreneur, I mean, he started out, his original idea was to have a space for yoga classes, right, and where you could rent spaces for yoga, and that didn't take off, right? So he evolved the business. But I think the thing that stands out with me about that particular entrepreneur is he is a real sponge for knowledge. And when he started out, he did not, I mean, he was an author beforehand, but he'd never run a business. He didn't really know anything about the space. But when I joined, he started his business about a year before I joined Real Ventures, and he was always phoning me up. What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And as I said, just somebody who is a sponge for knowledge. They take all the feedback and they learn and they grow. And I'm not sure that it's like, hey, one particular pivot point, but it's like all those moments along the way where you always got to be evolving the business and adopting and learning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jeff, I mean, is an example from one of the many companies that you've sort of, or the three major very successful companies you've worked at that I'm sure you were in charge of a project or something where you had to kind of grow quickly or hire quickly. I mean, any experiences or lessons from that?
Well, that totally resonates. Even when I started in the Mississauga office, we had 75 employees. I could meet everybody, we could talk about the culture, we could do things. It was really easy, even less so kind of prior to that path. Now we're at 270. And so that requires different thinking of how you engage and how you pull the employees together and how you explain strategy and why we're doing certain things. And so that evolving continues on even in the larger organizations of constantly having to rethink how you're running your business. For the founders in particular, that tends to be the case. And one of the big things I've seen is when you start off, when it's just you and some partners, you don't really think about your values, or maybe you probably think about your mission because you're pitching. But as the companies scale, all of a sudden you have to stop and think, okay, like what are our values and what is it we stand for? And you have to codify it at some point because you're no longer able just to assume everybody knows it. And it's that same kind of natural evolution. Like, okay, what point do you get to like, oh crap, now I actually have to think process.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. There's a question on here that from the TSX about like what conferences do you attend, and I was like, it's an interesting question. Like I'm just like like I haven't been doing this for that long, and I never really saw conferences as like that useful. Like if there's someone that I want to reach out to, I just figure out how to do it. But sometimes maybe that's because that it didn't exactly work that way when I was a student journalist, and I call people up, they don't actually want to talk to me the same way they want to talk to me when I work at Bloomberg for some reason. But I'm wondering how, in terms of like interaction, meeting new people, getting involved in early stage technology, I feel like in the tech community we have a pretty tight group, and we kind of people are pretty open and to other people reaching out as long as there's sort of an intro or some kind of common denominator. But if you're coming from somewhere else and say you are interested in making a career move to early stage technology, I mean, is there like, do you go to some of these conferences? Like, how would you suggest, I guess, breaking into this industry? Go ahead.
I have found, so I joined Real Ventures about 2 years ago. Before that, I mean, I'd run, started and ran Kijiji and done a few other things, but I really was not well hooked in. I barely knew any other venture capitalists. I knew very few people in the startup community, and so I just thought, okay, I better start meeting people. And I was surprised how open and welcoming the community was. And so I think that if you're new to Toronto and you want to get involved, I mean, there's events you can go to, you can meet people, reach out to somebody, ask them to introduce you to other people. And I mean, I think it's sort of networking 101 is try to look out for how you can help other people, right? And make a difference. But I was pleasantly surprised at how open and welcoming the entire Canadian ecosystem is. Mm-hmm.
Jeff, like, what is your interaction with smaller companies? I mean, I'm sure for business development purposes and acquisition, you always want to know what the ecosystem is in Canada. I mean, like, do you attend conferences? Do you go and I mean, I guess you're speaking at this right now, but this kind of thing, like, what do you think is the value, and how do you pull the value out of it?
Yeah, I think it depends on the organization. In our case, we're heavily connected to small businesses being successful, in particular QuickBooks. And so there's a vested stake in me being in the startup community and helping entrepreneurs grow. So part of it's just in line with where our organization is, and part of it's that entrepreneurial itch that I get energy from. But I get involved with the incubators and accelerator a little bit. Some of the tech conferences and things like Futurepreneur, Startup Canada, those big organizations where you've got national scale, I get involved with those. But outside of that, I don't attend many large corporate organizations.
Yeah, I mean, it's a small country, right? Like, if you want to reach out, I mean, it's relatively easy. Like, it's great. Like, even when you go to the Valley, like, if you know Canadians, it's sort of like you're into all these different parts of Silicon Valley and New York as well. I mean, are there other ways that Canadians can, whether we're working here or whether we're working abroad, use that network that we have, Janet?
I guess, yes, reach out. As you say, in the Valley, there's a very strong Canadian network. I actually found living abroad made me a more patriotic Canadian than ever living here, right? Because you go and you're like, wow, and now I really realize how great Canada is and how strong the bond is. So I think, and I know it's the same thing in London, England, or wherever you go, right? You find the other Canadians and they'll hook you up with other Canadians, and it's a nice network and almost family away from family.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we can go to some questions pretty quickly, but I just wanted to ask before that, I mean, are there things that startups can learn from bigger companies? We kind of asked what are things that bigger companies can learn from startups, but there is obviously this attitude in the startup community that, like, all business is broken and we're gonna fix it with disruption and doing things differently and kind of flipping things on its head. But what are things that are like real valuable lessons that early stage companies should pull out of the experiences of larger companies? Jeff?
I often think, what can large companies pull out of the startup community? It seems like it's like the in vogue thing right now, is creating startup mentality in your large organization. Apple claimed it, as a startup, however many years into it, says we're startup, 32-year startup. And sometimes that can mean, like, that's an ability to squeeze the nickels and not spend as much. But I don't really think that's what it is. I think it is, what startups have is this, because of scarcity, this need to get the quickest insight or prove a hypothesis out with as minimum resources as possible in the shortest amount of time. And that's what large companies lose over time. And so that's one thing that I think we strive for when we think startup. That's what we think is, like, lean. How do you quickly get to an answer? And the other thing that as I reflect on some of the mistakes I've made, in particular at Intuit, where we'll think, okay, our customer wants this, and we'll spend all this energy on kind of building something, and then we get 6 months in, and then you put a prototype in front of a customer, and you're like, oh yeah, we completely missed the mark. Startups, for the most part, don't do that, because they're the founders are, like, close to the customer. They're the chief salesperson as well as product development. And so they're constantly in front of the customer. And so large companies need to remember that it's really important to get your prototypes out really early, even concept stage, to make sure you're on the mark and not wait months or years before you find out that hard lesson.
Yeah, what do you think?
I think that one thing that startups can learn from large companies is just the rigor. That too many times small companies, they try to do too many things too quickly. And I think that just the rigor that you look at in terms of the large companies are forced to go through or can go through, whether that be their financial modeling, and not that a startup needs to go to the same extent, but I guess I see a lot of startups that don't do the basics right. I guess that's what I'm saying, that they don't do the basics right. They don't do their financial modeling well enough. They don't think enough about the values of the company. They keep a poor performer on, they keep a poor performer on because it's easier to keep a poor performer than try to get rid of them, right? And it's or they don't think through things well enough, or they don't. Sometimes startups, they work so quickly that they don't make sure that their I's are dotted and their T's are crossed. And while yes, the whole startup culture, you need to move quickly, at the same time, too many startups not move too quickly, but they just don't they're not rigorous enough, and those shortcuts come back to haunt them.
Yeah, if I can just play off that, one of the things, when we ask small businesses, what would you do if you were to go back like 5 years? So these are people like 3 to 5 year tenure, and say, what would you do, differently, or what would you tell others that are in your, following your path to do differently? The number one thing they say is financial management skills. Learn it early, because it's really hard when you're trying to make sure you hit payroll or make sure you get that loan. So invest in early. And then if you look at small businesses that have sold and are starting up a new company, one of the first things they do is get an accountant to help them out. But the early stage small businesses don't do that. Oh, I don't have enough money for that. And then they pay for it down the road. So making sure that you're, as a small business, you're really thinking about you're surrounding yourself with the best people, whether that be mentors or financial advisors to help guide you. Man, that just gives you so much confidence to be able to move with speed down the road, and kind of helps force some of the rigor that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So,
In terms of when you built Kijiji in Canada, if you were to start over again, is there something you'd do differently?
It's a good question. I mean, I think we sort of meandered around a little bit, and eventually we found our way. I think that the thing that we did, originally we tested a bunch of different marketing vehicles, and a lot of them didn't work. And then what we did was narrowed in on 3 things that we were going to do to grow the business. And I said to the team, we are going to be the best, basically best in the world on these 3 things. And so it was really a focus. So yeah, I could have gone back and, hey, we had a few months where we were just trying a bunch of different things, and none of those worked out. But I think that's sort of a natural part of the learning process.
Yeah, you needed to do that to get to what worked.
Exactly. Yeah.
If anyone has any questions, we can do that right now. Still too early, or?
So one thing I'll just a point that I wanted to say is that. We talked a lot about how the role of a CEO or the entrepreneur changes over time as the company is growing, and I think absolutely that's the case. But one of the things that I often talk to our founders about is there's 3 things that the CEO needs to do, and I think that fundamentally these don't change a lot. The number 1 is to develop a strong strategy and vision, and to communicate that consistently and clearly. Number 2 is to hire great people and to motivate them. And number 3, which maybe it should be number 1, is don't run out of money. But fundamentally, I think that if you as a founder think about every day, I've got to do those 3 things. If you set the right strategy and vision, if you have an awesome team that's motivated, and if you make sure you don't run out of money, like you're going to be on a good track.
Okay, since there's no questions yet from the crowd, I'm going to start with one. Oh, there is one there, okay. I'll come back to mine then.
Sorry for stealing your question. So my name is Jesse, I work at PwC, and I want to just comment, love the evolution of the founder. Janet, that was great. And then Jeff, you said something I liked, and it was prototyping faster, and the bigger companies have a harder time doing that. So I work in the innovation team, and we do that. We try to prototype ideas faster. But I want to ask you guys, what is your go-to kind of way of testing an idea? Is it developing an MVP, or is it creating a facade and doing a really early test? Google Ventures put out a book recently. I'll tell everyone it's called Sprint. Great book, and that's my question. How do you look at successfully prototyping ideas?
Okay, so I think it really varies upon the idea. There's some types of ideas that can be prototyped a lot faster, right? It's so if for instance you have a website, right, and you want to test a different user experience or different flow, that's pretty easy. You can do a different flow on your website, put it out to a small sample group, and see the impact. Something that's much harder to prototype, as an example, is if you're doing hardware, right? And hardware is it's more expensive. It's harder to get that prototype out. So I think the answer is it really depends. But sometimes you can go out and talk to customers, although often customers, what they say and what they do is not always consistent. But I would say, if there's any way that you can test it via online website and taking a segment of your users and putting them through a different flow, then ideally that's if you can make that, if you can do that easily, that would be great. I mean, getting back to Kijiji, that's what we were always testing the website. Like every week we would have different tests going on in terms of, okay, let's take 10% of our users, we're going to put them through this user face. These changes. Some of them were major tweaks, some of them were minor tweaks, right? In terms of monetization, always. I mean, in one quarter we increased the monetization that we had per page by 3x. So you can imagine what that did to our bottom line, 3x. And it was just like we lined up all these different experiments, and we just experimented, quick, and then moved to that. But I mean, as I said, if you have a website, it's fairly easy to do that.
For business models or web design or web flow, that's what we do as well. We use user testing, and test in that kind of closed environment, and then we'll open it up and do A/B tests. For TurboTax, we run A/B tests pretty much like a test every 3 days. We got like a short window where you have to do all of your testing, and then your testing has to slow down because there's too much risk in the season. For product development, we use rapid prototyping where we can. So we'll bring customers in, we'll show them either real code, like a mock-up, or we'll just sketch it out. And what we're getting better at is we'll say, okay, what's your feedback to this? And then say, great. And then the team will go off and then sketch, and then come back and say, okay, now the next click looks like this. What does that look like? What do you do? And then you test that, and that's been working. Nothing beats actually putting product in front of people and seeing what they do, but that's the closest you can get to it, and it seems to be working for us. It's just a challenge of getting, depending on your segment, it's sometimes just a challenge getting the customers in quick enough to move.
There's one at the back.
Way in the back.
Hi, my name is Jeff Charlton with FlexServe. Jeff, given that you now own a big percentage of the small business market, is there anything that you can tell us in terms of where Intuit is going, either mid-market, new applications, futures?
Yeah, the big shift for us is we've in QuickBooks, and I think we'll get there in consumer as well, is we've gone from an app company to a platform company. So desktop, QuickBooks Desktop was for the most part a relatively closed system. And QuickBooks Online is an open platform. And so we've gone from, hey, let's solve these core problems, to, hey, we're going to solve these core problems, but if we open up our data, then others can solve other problems that make the ecosystem stronger. And so it's really shifted our mindset of how we think about things, and what we don't try to protect and what we do try to protect. That amount we can protect is actually pretty narrow if you have that kind of mindset. And so now we're spending more time trying to go out and find other companies that want to build on top of the platform and help evangelize them, which is great for Canadians because there's a lot of fintech companies in Canada. So that's what we're doing, but that helps solve a lot of vertical and horizontal needs. Where we'll go next, although not this year, is we'll start to move up stack and build more capabilities in core QuickBooks to be able to solve for larger and larger organizations. But right now, our focus is on service small business and service small self-employed, which we think self-employed is an untapped market, in particular in Canada, that we can help solve problems for that growing segment of small businesses.
Great, thank you.
Morning, Andre Sakino from the Working Group. I have actually a different question for each of you. Janet, I wanted to ask you what one or two companies in your portfolio do you think that we should know about? And Jeff, my question for you is if you could acquire any Canadian company, who would you have in mind? It's your wish list, Christmas wish list in June.
Wow. Go ahead.
Oh, wow. Well, of course, I think you should know about all of our companies. A couple of them that you should know about. I think that I'll choose some Toronto-based ones. One is a company called Hubba, which is doing, several people may have heard of it, great founders. What they're doing, they've been described as sort of the LinkedIn for product information. So they're going to be the single repository for any information with respect to a brand. So if you're like a product, right, like this, like photos of it, images, all the specs and things like that, so that retailers can access that information, brands can upload it. They're doing extremely well, growing very quickly. as I said, the experienced founders, their vision is to build a huge business. 90% of their customers are in the US, so going after the US market in a major way and beating a lot of the competitors in the US, which is always good. So that's one. Another one I would say, let me see, I already mentioned League. There's so many, they're all great. I would say, another one, I'll pick another one sort of at the other end of a spectrum, is a wearables company that we have that's called Triton Wear, and they have a swimming wearable. The company originally actually came out of Waterloo, recently moved to Toronto, started by a couple of engineers, and basically it's a wearable that goes on the back of the swimmer's goggles and communicates 12 key metrics. They're having tremendous success selling into swimming clubs all over the world, and really using the data to build a real community. I would say, just a shout out to Waterloo. These guys, they graduated, two engineers from Waterloo, and it never ceases to amaze me how much business knowledge and maturity and how strategically they think. It's, I'd put them up against anybody who was graduating from Harvard MBA. Like just the way they think about the business, it's very impressive.
So as Intuit, not Jeff Cates, I like companies that either help give us scale, so they have to be big already, or they're so core to functions that it would really help save time, either for small businesses or accountants from the QuickBooks side. And so what I'm hearing more from customers is that they chose Shopify before they chose their QuickBooks, chose their FMS solution. And so Shopify hits the scale and obviously builds the network, so I'm be keen on them. And then the second one I really like is a company called HubDocs. And HubDocs is a Canadian company, and they take your bank data, your billing data, all sorts of different data that a small business needs, and they import that, and it automatically goes into your financial management software. But they also pull the PDFs of all of the documents, like your bank statement or your credit card statement, which makes it super easy to be able to track your expenditures or track your key data points. And that's pretty cool. For us, like any of the cloud accountants say, like, you need QuickBooks and you need that, and that like massively saves time. So that one strikes me as, man, if that was even more integrated, that would be a good thing.
Thanks, Eric Apps. Janet, question about public markets. So you're a VC, a lot of money in private equity and VC these days. Shopify's a happy story, but otherwise the public markets are pretty dead in Canada, at least for technology. As a VC, where do you see public markets fitting in terms of exits for you versus a sale or ultimately a long-term IPO after lots of money's been invested? I think it depends. Obviously, we would like our companies to all go IPO rather than sort of a quick sale to an acquirer who may not pay as much. But I think as you may be alluding to, like there's a lot of companies, like Uber is probably the best example, right? Huge companies that are staying private and people are saying, when are you going to go public? And so I think that, I'll put it this way, when we make our investments, we don't think about the public markets and sort of the sentiment. We're making 10-year investments. Our best companies if they go public, it's going to be a long time off. It's going to be a totally different cycle. So we sort of don't take that into account. We really think, hey, is this a huge business? Do we think they're going to be? Is this a huge vision, a big business? Is this the team that can take it all the way? Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
Thanks a lot. My name is Brian from Startup Tech Unleashed. My biggest question would be to both Jeff and for Janet is, what's that one key nugget of advice you'd really give to an early stage startup if you can have them sitting down right beside you?
You kind of hit on it earlier, but it's that focus, like know the problem you're trying to solve and fall in love with the problem. because if you fall in love with the problem, there's lots of hows around it. But often what I see is entrepreneurs don't have that crisp and they wander, and then they lose the energy of their employees, or they lose the energy of their lenders. So fall in love with the problem and focus on that.
Yeah. I would say, don't run out of money.
Also a good one.
Yeah, is a big thing. But I would say though, execute with excellence, right? And that is so much of it comes down to execution, right? And a lot of people just use the example of Kijiji. Why was Kijiji successful? Really, it's an online classified site, right? Craigslist was already in market. There were dozens of other sites that were very, very similar, but I think what we did was we executed extremely well, right? In terms of how the product was built, their marketing, we tested, executed, and had a great team. And I think so often it comes down to that, and too often that's forgotten, right? People get all hung up about, oh, here's the idea, what's the idea? It's like, well, at the end of the day, as I said, execution. It all comes down to execution.
What about hiring? You spoke a little bit about prototyping and how to prototype really quickly, but a lot of the time when you're growing quickly at a large or small company, you have to hire very, very quickly and maybe faster than you'd want to. What are some ways, like guidelines or hacks to make sure that you don't, hire the wrong people when you have to hire, 10 people in 2 weeks? Janet?
So I would say, number one is you've got to make sure that everybody is outstanding. And a lot of CEOs will spend more than 50% of their time finding the right people. It's the most important thing, right? You've got to make sure that every person on your team is an A+ player, and you may not be able to hire as quickly, but you've got to make sure that they have that they are outstanding. And if you hire somebody and they're not outstanding, that you have to let them go quickly, right? The real danger is that the organization, if you have let's call it a C player, that the C player will bring the organization down. You cannot think, hey, the organization's will bring the C player up. No, too often they bring it down. And if you have a B player who's doing hiring, B players are going to hire C players. So I think that that's really important. And when I talk about hiring great people, to me, the most important thing is not what their skills are and where they went to university. It's what is their attitude. Are they hungry? Are they positive? Are they willing to work hard? Are they willing to learn? Because I think if you take somebody who is energetic and enthusiastic and hardworking and just, as I said, sponge for knowledge, they're going to be successful.
Jeff, what's been your experience with hiring?
I think that's bang on. That's what I would recommend. The process we're using now, we call A for A, assessing for awesome. We have, it's more for larger companies. Smaller companies don't have this much rigor, but we'll have the recruiter talk to the person, then the hiring manager, and then we have them come in, and if it's a developer, you got a code. So we need to actually see you do the craft we're hiring you for. So they can talk about something else that they've done as a project that's related, and then they actually have to show whatever we're hiring them for. So if we're hiring you as a web designer, you're gonna show us your web design. And then we'll give them a specific craft, say, okay, go look at this, now tell us what you would do. And we have subject matter experts, like people that we think are awesome on that hiring panel. So awesome hires awesome. And then we try to make a decision on the day coming out of that. If we've got somebody that's awesome, then we try to make an offer that day. Doesn't always work that way, but we're getting better at it.
Right. I think we've got
one more question.
Okay, one more question.
Hi, one of the key ingredients for young entrepreneurs is understanding the financial systems well, P&L, balance sheet, cash flow. 2 questions. In your opinion, young entrepreneurs, how knowledgeable are they? And if they aren't, where do they go to get it?
I'll start. So I told you we did that study work asking if you could go back and do it all over again, what would you do? Number one, this thing they said was financial management skills. Number one reason why you fail is you go out of money. And often you don't know you're going to go out of money. So it's really, really important. So we did another study of small businesses. Do you think you're above average or below average on financial management skills, your knowledge? I think it was something like 9 out of 10 said, I'm above average. So then we tested it. And we gave just a simple, basic test, and 40% failed, and 60%, I would say, failed. And so that showed us that there seems to be this like, oh, I'm better than average, but I know I have a problem. The small businesses that have tenure will know I should have been better early. And then when you ask, are you above or below? They say above, and then when you test, they're below. So what does that tell you? Well, it tells you they don't know what they don't know. And so part of, I think there's 3 tenets. I've sat on this national task force on financial literacy for small businesses. I think there's 3 tenets. One is we need to educate, at least know what you don't know. You don't have to know all the answers. You just need to know what questions you need to ask. 2 is you need to connect them with financial advisors. You need to connect them to a bookkeeper and accountant that can provide real-time advice and coaching. This is something you shouldn't have to know. There's people out there that do it as a living. And then 3rd is connect them to technology that's in service to those first 2 things. Pushing insights like, hey, your receivables are out of control. You're gonna run out of money. Or that allow your mentors, whether that be a loan officer or an accountant, to be real-time in the data coaching you. If you're just giving your data to your advisor once a quarter and asking them to do a task, you're not going to get advice. But if you can connect them real time into the data and say, hey, you're responsible for overseeing my business, now you're using them as a CEO, right? You're using them as a completely different, or CFO, you're using them completely different as a resource. So three things: education, connect to the best talent, use technology that gets the most out of those first 2 things. Long answer.
Yeah, and I would say you're right. I mean, what we see in our companies is a huge variety, but that is absolutely critical and one thing that we look at very carefully and work with the entrepreneurs. So after we invest in a company, every 3 or 4 months we have a 2-day boot camp from all the companies that we've most recently invested in, and we spend a lot of time talking about financial modeling and how to do it and the importance of it. And then we work with each of our companies to make sure, hey, do you have the right system? Do you have the right financial modeling? Let's walk through your model. Is it good enough? And if it becomes apparent that the entrepreneur cannot do it, then which is in most cases is either they can't do it or they don't have time, then we'll make sure that they have a part-time CFO type of person. But as you say, it's not about, a lot of entrepreneurs think, oh yeah, I'm all covered, I got a bookkeeper. No, this is not about keeping a bookkeeper. This is about projecting around understanding how your key success factors or your key metrics fall through, the leading indicators, so you know, okay, hey, in 2 months I'm going to have a sales problem because I don't have enough in the funnel, etc. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, yeah, well, thank you guys very much. And thanks for the questions. I like getting the nitty-gritty business stuff. So yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you.
So just in closing, 2 very quick thank yous from our perspective. First of all, thank you to Jeff Musson and North of 41 for the ongoing partnership with you guys. Everything that you're doing is amazing, and we're so happy to be partnering with you on this. And then secondly, and most importantly, thank you to the 3 people on the stage. They're all giving of their time. We don't pay them for this. And so we are in very, very good hands when we know that we've got mentors and leaders like Janet, Jeff, and Garrett who are kind enough to donate their time to help the next generation of great companies. So a big thank you to the 3 of you for everything you've done. Really appreciate it.